Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. That time of week again. We only got a couple more of these left this season. 2 weeks remaining in the season. Just finished watching Arizona walk off the Brewers. And guys, you know I normally do this video right after the afternoon games end, before the Sunday nighter starts. But for whatever reason, Arizona and the Brewers wanted to go the complete distance, an hour and a half, almost longer than normal. So we're starting this one up a little bit late. The late night game, Atlanta and the Dodgers, has already started a few innings in, I believe, and it's still 0-0, so not much going on there. But guys, we're going to jump into this. We're going to go through all 30 teams. I wanted to wait till that game ended because in my heart of hearts, it impacted a little bit of the top 10 here and how I was ranking. And that game was just too much fun. I couldn't keep my eyes off it. I had to see who was going to win before doing this video. Before I jump in, guys, we are on our way. 1,500 subs. That's all I'm asking for by the end of the MLB season, playoffs included. Going to be giving away a hat. So if you are not a sub, make sure you do that. But otherwise, guys, we're just going to jump in because we're a little bit behind schedule, and we're going to go through this bottom row relatively quickly. Number 30, what else can I say? They're trying really hard not to be the worst MLB team in history. I think they had to go 9-5 over their last 14. Maybe it was 8-6, something like that. And somehow since then, they've won 2 games against Oakland. They are on a 2-game winning streak. Still think they're going to be the worst team in MLB history based on their record. How can they really win more than 500 over the last 4 series? But maybe some teams are going to help them out. They did get swept by Cleveland early in the week, so overall still a losing week for them, 2-4 on the week. And if they keep doing these losing weeks, we know where they're going to end. Number 30, pretty much a staple all season long. Number 29, they've been pretty much making an argument for being the worst team in the MLB, at least over the past month and a half. 1-2 against Minnesota, getting swept by Houston, so a 1-5 week for the Angels. And it feels like over the past 4 weeks, they've definitely had losing weeks after losing weeks, a bunch of times getting swept. So if you really look at the records to them and the White Sox over the past month, pretty close. And the Angels, I think, are going to be in that category. Coming into next season, of course, they'll have Trout back. They'll have a couple other things. Whereas the White Sox, I'm not sure what they're excited about. Maybe if you're a White Sox fan and somehow you stumbled across this video, let me know in the comments below what you are looking forward to next season, even if you're an Angels fan, right? Number 28. I thought about kind of switching this one up, and I'm going to do it. I have the Miami Marlins dropping up 1 spot. They've kind of been the same in the exact bottom 4 for the last little while. But the Marlins went 0-3 against Pittsburgh, 1-3 against Washington. Both those teams were in the bottom row last week, so an overall 1-6 week for the Marlins. Not great whatsoever, and the offense continues to be the story for them pretty much all season. And for the longest time, they were being shut out at least once a week. It hasn't really been the case that I can remember, at least over the past number of weeks, but they still don't really put up a lot of runs. So that's obviously going to play a big impact on being able to pick up wins. Going 1-3 against the one team in their division that you would think that they can be somewhat competitive against, and has me wondering if they are even going to be able to take a step forward next year as well. So Marlins have some work cut out for them. They did beat this team a couple of weeks ago, but I still think this team is starting to make a little bit more progress. Number 27, I do have the Colorado Rockies, and the Rockies, seems like some of their younger guys have made somewhat of an impact, and we saw it over this weekend. A grand slam against the Cubs was super exciting. They did win a series against the Cubs, so they do manage to win more series here and there than it feels like the rest of the 3 teams, so that does play into it as well for me. Going 1-2 against Detroit, avoiding a sweep against one of the hottest teams across the entire MLB, ending that on the 3rd game of that series. So a little bit of credit going to Colorado Rockies. It seems like more often than not, they're not putting up the 1-6 kind of records that we see some of these other teams do. So I did want to give them a little bit of a shout out. Clearly, they're the worst team in the NL West, but it seems like maybe we'll see some progress going into next year. One thing, if you've been a member of this channel for the last number of seasons, there are teams that become staples in the bottom row relatively for the whole season. But then we start to see after a year, maybe year and a half, they start to climb the board. And some of the teams that are in the top 2 rows this year, they were staples in the bottom row 2 years ago. So just as quick as that, if I was going to put my finger on a team that might have a progress next year, it might be the Colorado Rockies. So I do want to give a little bit of credit there. Number 26, I have the Washington Nationals. A pretty quiet week in their own division. They had a 2-game set with the Atlanta Braves, which they split. One of the games they got absolutely smashed. But then they do win the series against the the Marlins, which I kind of already touched on. Not much going there. 5-game week, not a whole lot of impact overall. It's not going to talk too much about them. They were 25 and they fall back into the bottom row. It seems like the Oakland A's have to go out with the Oakland A's style of being, and that's in the bottom row. The Oakland A's have been probably one of the teams that have been in the bottom row the most of the 4 or 5 years I've been doing this. And it doesn't help when you lose to the Chicago White Sox, a team. Not many teams lose the series, and they managed to do that this weekend, losing the past Saturday and Sunday games by 1 run, and they only won the Friday one by 2. So overall, a wash run differential wise over 3 games. Not exactly what you want to see against a team that is setting the worst record of all time. Oakland, on top of that, they had a pretty good start to the week. They play in Houston, win that series. They still managed to play pretty strongly in their own division. I want to start seeing them be a little more monstrous when they start reaching outside of that division. Starting to be up in the air. I heard rumors, I don't know, I didn't really follow up too much on it, whether Sacramento might be out of the running going into next year. Who knows, but right now the A's are really up in the air. So I think it's safe to put them back in that bottom row. Moving on to number 24, fighting their way out of that bottom row. It's Pittsburgh, and really it is on the heels of a nice sweep against the Marlins. I do have a little bit more optimistic. I know I probably say this about Pittsburgh all the time, but it feels like there should be more optimism around this team with some of the players that they do have, with Paul Skeens, of course, being that staple now in their rotation. They have a couple other good arms in the rotation, so you would expect them to be higher than 24 based on what we've seen at times, but they still managed to put together enormous losing streak. So if they can avoid that next year, well, this is a team that I think is going to kind of bottom out here. You can only go up from where Pittsburgh is. The division is kind of wide open going forward. Managing a 1-2 series against Kansas City, a team that is in that playoff hunt, avoiding the sweep today, which was pretty good for them. Nice 4-3 win for Pittsburgh. Not too much else. They're going to kind of build on what they've been building on all season. Really, it should have been a better season. That's one team I think should have been doing better. Number 23, we have the Cincinnati Reds. And ever since I kind of predicted them to take that 6th seed in the NL, it's been kind of wheels off for them. They had a series makeup game to start the week against Atlanta, and they won 1-0. So pretty impactful game. A nice way to play a little bit of spoiler there. Then they go 1-2 against St. Louis Cardinals, a team that's been 500 or sub 500 now for a couple of weeks. Not what you want to do. You want to be able to make up ground in this division. You want to kind of demonstrate that they're the second best, because the second best team in this division really is up for grabs, and they kind of falling short, and fall short against St. Louis, not super great. And then 2-1 against Minnesota. So that series was interesting in the fact that they put up tons of runs. At times we see sides of Cincinnati where the runs just come piling in, but it doesn't feel like the pitching, on the other hand, is matching their output on the offense. If they can kind of sort that out, I suspect they'll be right there in the middle of the pack next year, fighting for that playoff spot. This division, I'm excited to see what the division looks like in 2025, because it's so tight right now, especially the fact that they're all on the weaker side except for the Brewers. It's going to be interesting. Some of them are going to have to take a step forward, and someone's going to have to come out and be the definite worst team in this division. Right now, I'm not quite sure who that's going to be. Number 22, kind of sticking around. I wanted to see what them take some steps forward now that they have Scherzer coming back throwing his first game this year. A couple other guys coming back from injury. I was hoping we would see a better side of them. They went 0-2 against Arizona for a 2-game series in the middle of the week, and then they start the 4-game set with Seattle. Real opportunity for them to show that they're really a better team than they've demonstrated. They win the first game, and then they have 3 more, and they drop all 3 of them. So the fact that they couldn't play spoiler against their division rival, they just couldn't find a series tie or win, kind of has the rest of the teams who seem to be more competitive at least playing spoiler more often than Texas. Maybe Texas has packed it in. World Series champs last year and completely out of it at this point this year, and maybe it's just riding out the rest of the year. Number 21, dropping quite a few spots, and realistically their record hasn't demonstrated this kind of drop, but getting swept by the Blue Jays over this weekend has me thinking that the 500 is a little bit of smoke and mirrors so far this season. They've had obviously a lot of games against the National League Central, which I think if we had to vote would be the weakest division in all of baseball. Maybe I'll do a poll on that, and so check that out. But that's probably helped them garner a nice record, whereas the Jays find a nice sweep. The Jays seem to have some of these guys, younger guys, starting to deliver, and maybe if the Jays had this roster for longer, would have been a different story. We talked about it already. They did beat Cincinnati, so I do have them a little bit ahead. But the fact you're winning in your own division, the weakest division, has me kind of folding them back. I was called out a couple of weeks ago that I had them too high, and maybe I did, and now this is maybe me adjusting. Number 20, I had the San Francisco Giants, and it's pretty much come down to earth here. And they run differential-wise have been pretty much behind the 8 ball. Record-wise, they've been doing pretty good. This weekend demonstrated that they're quite a ways behind the rest of their division, the guys that are playing for the playoff race, and I think that creates a little bit more of a spread in the power rankings wise. Getting swept by the Padres, had a chance but got lost in the extra innings today as well. They lose the earlier week as well, 1-2 against Milwaukee. So overall, 1-5 week against playoff teams, and I think that's pretty standard for anyone in this second bottom row. You're going to be losing against the teams that are in the playoff run. And I think maybe a little bit of high performance luck balls earlier for San Francisco has created somewhat of a winning record. They were battling 500 for a little bit there, but things are starting to even out. They do have a few more games against their division, and I wouldn't expect them to do anything crazy in that division. And I think finishing here makes a lot of sense. Number 19, giving them a little bit more credit. They did have a flirtation with the bottom row a few weeks ago. Since then, and since it seems like they probably don't have much to play for anymore, it seems like they're letting loose. Vladdy, on the other hand, is playing epic. It's probably his best season ever as a Toronto Blue Jay, and he's only 25. The key for Toronto, if they're going to want to stay here or move up going into next season, they have to figure out how they're going to keep Vladdy for a long-term deal, because that's going to be a big important thing whether the Jays are going to be competitors into the playoffs into the future. Sweeping the Cardinals over the weekend, had a real shot, and they should have beat the Mets earlier in the week, but they end up losing that series 2-1. And it's because, of course, they were pushing Bowden Francis, who was going again into the 9th inning with a no-hitter, and he gave up a home run again in that situation. Same situation as a couple of weeks ago. Had it been playoffs on the line, had all that, maybe they don't do that and they win the series. But that was a tight game and they blow that one. But Jays overall, since some of these younger guys, some of the guys they got from trading all their guys, have made solid spots in this roster, they seem to be playing loose and playing pretty solid baseball. I think if you're any team vying for a playoff spot, you don't really want to play a Jays team, because on paper, I don't think they're as bad as what you might see. So they're playing good baseball. I like what the Jays have seen. Can they build on it? The rotation is solid. Will they build on it? Next year is all what it's about. Number 18, the one team ahead of the Jays in the division. It's relatively close. These guys, I think, play at least once more the rest of the year. I didn't go too far into it when I was obviously looking at the last 15 games of the season. When I did that video, I was focused merely on playoff teams, and with these two guys out of the playoffs, didn't really look at it, but I do think they do match up, so that's going to be interesting to look at in the power rankings department. It's always kind of the only point with these low teams going the rest of the years. Do they play each other? How are they going to match up? That fun stuff. So Tampa Bay, 2-2 over the weekend against Cleveland. Again, I talk about this every single week. Tampa has the pitching. They're always competitive. They're never an easy out. And realistically, I think they're only 5 games out of playoffs. It's not impossible, but it's pretty impossible. They have a lot of guys to hop. 0-3 against Philly to start the week. Really hurt it, and it kind of demonstrated that, hey, yeah, they have the capabilities to compete, but there are going to be times they just don't have the talent to put together solid win streaks. And on the other hand, when that's the case, you have more odds of putting on together losing streaks, and we kind of saw that with the series with Philly earlier this week, and that puts them at number 18. Number 17, Chicago Cubs. I left them off my playoff prediction video that I did this past week, mainly because they're 5 games out, and I just didn't see them having a path to get there, and they really demonstrated that this weekend, losing the series to Colorado. Not what I like to see. They seem to have times where they're just looking real good. We saw it with a little bit of a win streak a couple of weeks ago where they were looking really hot, but it just seems like the depth on their starting rotation specifically, as well as their bats, just doesn't bode well for a long-term winning 600 type baseball, which is what they needed to get back in this playoff race. 17, I think, is respectable. They're going to end pretty much average in the league, but they want to be able to find ways to build on that next year. I don't know what that's going to look like, free agency and stuff like that. I don't know what their contracts look like. Cubs fans, I look forward to hearing from you on that kind of situation. 16. We got the Boston Red Sox. It's pretty much still a good finish. Like if you would have told me at the beginning of this year that the Red Sox would be number 16 at this point in the season, I'd be like, okay, they're having a pretty good year. But if you look in comparison with how it was going a month and a half ago, it's been a little bit of a disappointment. They had such a good chance. They were in that wild card hunt. They were really holding on to a spot for a little while there, and it's kind of slowed down, and they're starting to have some tough situations. 1-3 against the Yankees this weekend. Pretty much put a staple, I think, in their playoff chances. There's just two teams ahead of them now who still aren't in the playoffs that are playing better baseball, probably have easier schedules than Boston. Boston still manages to beat Baltimore earlier this week. If Baltimore hadn't had such a surmountable lead in the division before, I'd have a lot more concern for that situation. But Boston still plays well, but it's probably time to pack it in. Number 15. They're sticking around. I think over the last 10, they're probably one of the best in the MLB. I think it's 7-3 over their last 10. And really, this past weekend was a possible season saver, going 3-1 against Texas. Now, I think, I'm going off the top of my head, I think they're 3 games out of a wild card spot now. Minnesota has had some struggles. Really, that's the only spot that feels up for grabs. And we're going to talk about that as we get into the top 2 rows. But Seattle managing to stick around, and they're going to have to put together some very awesome next 2 weeks if they are going to get back into this playoff position. Seattle's also going 1-1 against San Diego in a little 2-game set. Didn't get swept, didn't sweep, but against a playoff team, got to be respectable. They do have somewhat of a tougher schedule coming up as well in the playoff race, and we talked about it in the Final 15 video I just did. They had 2 ways to get into the playoffs, division or the wild card. Both, they were 4.5 games out. The problem with the division is it's Houston. Houston does have a fairly easy schedule. They had the Angels 6 games, and as we saw this weekend, they swept 3 of those games already. So that's going to make it a little bit tougher for them to catch up. But of course, it's possible. Houston hasn't played amazing. Seattle's got to keep up this path they are on. Number 14. That team I was just talking about, they are holding on to that last wild card spot right now. Guys, you got to remember now, we're going to get into a situation here where I'm going to start talking about teams that are lower, that are technically in playoff positions, and they're going to be below teams that aren't. The thing is, there is 2 weeks left, and sure, this team might have a couple games lead, and it might end up leading them to the playoffs, but in the power rankings, I would think had the season been extended a little bit longer, we would see the Twins fall out of the playoffs. That's kind of what I'm trying to say with this, based on what we're seeing, based on how they've been playing. And the 1-2 series against Cincinnati this weekend was very big sign for it's just not going well in Minnesota right now. They might have built up a big enough lead that they are going to hold on to that last spot, but there is some concern, and just based on the rankings here, just kind of demonstrates what I think the playoffs are going to look like if these teams do sneak in. And that number 13 is another one of those kind of stories. We do have the Baltimore Orioles, and I do believe they have a 4-game cushion in the wild card race right now. But by being ranked number 13, in theory, you're not a playoff team. But I think it's pretty realistic that they're going to make it. It just has me mega concerned whether or not they can even get past that first round, just based on what we've seen out of the Orioles. Another losing week / sub 500 week for the Orioles. 1-2 against Boston, 1-2 against Detroit. These guys have not been able to figure out how to play above 500 baseball for months now, and it's starting to really catch up to them. Had the season maybe been a month longer, I would be very, very concerned that they would fall out of a playoff spot. On the bonus side of things, they do seem to have some help coming back from the injury department. Maybe that's going to be enough to cushion them back into the top 12. But as of right now, I do have mega concerns. And even if they make that first round, I am concerned about who they're going to match up with. At this rate, I don't think the division really is up for grabs. Even though it's only a couple games, it just seems like it's out of their reach. They do have a pretty tough schedule, and one more series against the Yankees could tell all. If they sweep that, they're right back in it. Number 12. The Detroit Tigers have made it into the top 2 rows, and they're not quite in that wild card race yet. 2.5 games out of playoff contention, but they are playing some pretty great baseball. And honestly, if they keep playing at this rate and the other two teams struggle here, they're very well capable of getting in. 2-1 against Colorado, 2-1 against Baltimore over the weekend. Would have loved to see a complete series sweep against Colorado. They couldn't close it out in that third game. Of course, it's baseball. It's hard to find sweeps, but they're managing to pick up some wins. They had some pretty great wins against Baltimore over this weekend. The only one they lost to was to Corbin Burns, who is going to be a pretty big win for the Orioles on most nights. So them to put up and keep that game close was relatively awesome for them as well. They are a couple of games out. They do have another series against Baltimore. I think they have another one against the Royals. You have to check out my 15 video that I was talking about many times in this video. But Detroit falls in their court, in my opinion. Even though they're a couple games back, I think they can do a winning record. That'll be enough to get in. Number 11, I have the Atlanta Braves, 0-1 against Cincinnati, 1-1 against Washington. So not really a great start to the week. I talked about in my video as well that if they want to stay in this playoff race, they have to perform very well against the Dodgers. At least go 2-2, and since that video, they went 2-0 against the Dodgers, going for the third win today. They do have another game tomorrow against the Dodgers, so that's going to be very impactful. And on the plus side of that, the Mets had a little bit of a stumble, so right now they are tied back up for that last wild card spot. One of those teams is going to get it. Another team kind of struggling, so a lot up in the air right now in the National League is super thick. Braves kind of playing great baseball, and they do have a lot of things in their advantage as well. I think the Mets, on the contrary, have one of the toughest schedules out of all the teams left. We'll talk about that in a second. Number 10, of the Kansas City Royals, 1-2 against the Yankees, 2-1 against Pittsburgh. So 500 week, not winning against a playoff team like the Yankees. Yeah, it's a little concerning, but as a top 10 team and a team with a little bit of cushion, they have at least look a lot better than teams like Baltimore, teams like Minnesota. So that cushion has me a little bit more at ease than it would for those two teams. And at the same time, their rotation and their bullpen has me a little more confident than the other two. But I'd like to see them continue to build off this. Of course, a lot can happen. 12 games, only a couple game lead. You've got hungry teams behind them, and only, 3 teams here. One team's going to miss. Let me know. We got 5 teams, really, if you talk about Seattle, too. So a lot going on in the American League in the bottom of this race, and it's going to be tight. And the grand scheme of things, it seems like the American League is a little bit behind the National League. We'll talk about that near the end here. Number 9, these guys just wanted to hold me up all night with that Brewers game. It's just absolutely crazy. They were on their way to being swept, but they managed to avoid that happening. And honestly, if they got swept, they probably would have dropped them, because it's been a little bit concerning, especially with their bullpen and the amount of runs they've been giving up. Their bats have had injuries, issues as of late. They're definitely missing Marte, really that MVP of that roster. They lost Gurriel Jr. as well recently. Moreno's not in there, so there are some concerns there. And the rotation has had its struggles, especially this week. But a nice little boost earlier in the week, winning 2 games against Texas. Would have been awful to follow it up with a series sweep against Milwaukee, but a lot on the line coming up. They have a series that end with San Diego that could potentially be playoff driven. Who's going to get home field? They have another 4-game set with the same Brewers. I want to see them bounce back. Otherwise, we're going to start talking about a team that is barely holding on to that last wild card spot. And while we have the Braves and the Mets technically tied, I think they're only 1 game above those guys. And right now, I technically have the Mets as 1 rank above them on the power rankings. The Mets have just been one of the hottest teams. A little bit of concern, Francisco Lindor does leave the game today. I didn't really follow up on what's going on there. He had 1 at-bat. He did field the 1 inning, and then he left the game. So if that is a long-term situation, the Mets might have just lost their MVP. 2-1 against Toronto, 1-2 against Philadelphia. They started the series against Philly this weekend with a massive win and then followed up with 2 losses. Would have loved to see them close that series out. Would have been huge. I had them in the top 5 last week. I thought they were really going to build off of it, and then they fell back a little bit. Now, when you start looking at the rest of their season schedule, got a lot of concern, because they do have another series with Philly, and I know they have basically playing all playoff teams, so they really have to play 600 baseball with a hungry Braves team who has a little bit of an easier schedule. I do believe the Mets play Washington this week, so I want to see some big wins coming out of New York then. Number 7, I do have Houston Astros falling a couple of spots. And Mostly that has to do with they've been playing pretty mediocre, 1-2 against Oakland. Not great. And overall, the American League just seems to be a little bit behind the National League as a whole. They're holding on to the division. I don't really expect that to fall out. The sweep of the Angels very much helps secure that. They still have 3 more games again against the Angels, and that's probably going to help a lot. Houston, not a lot of concern. They just got to keep playing solid baseball. They do have a couple game lead. As long as they play 500, I think they should be all right. But they got to start thinking playoffs and long term. What's that going to look like? Number 6, moving up a couple of spots. Overall, 5-2 week for the Guardians against 2 lower opponents, sweeping the White Sox 2-2 against the Rays, and it was pretty good watching them play the Rays. They really had some shutdown pitching, shutdown bullpen. But at the same time, a little bit concerning that the offense wasn't getting anything really going, but they managed to take 2 wins, and in a playoff environment, the pitching, I think, is going to be very much important. And right now, I do have Cleveland as the top tier in the Central. I think they're going to pretty much walk away. They do have a nice cushion at this point, a couple of games. And their other 3 teams are kind of struggling. Like Royals and Twins aren't doing anything to catch up. And Detroit is probably a little bit too far to catch up. Number 5, I have the New York Yankees 2-1 against the Royals, 3-1 against Boston. Pretty much trying to cement this division as theirs. Top team in the American League. So the fact that I have the American League top team at number 5 just goes to show right now I'm leaning National League being a much stronger conference. And if you really look at the numbers, it's not surprising the National League in general has a much better win percentage against the American League. It seems like the top tier teams in the National League are stronger, and the middling maybe a little bit stronger for the American League, but that maybe has to do with them being able to beat up on the lower seeded National League teams as well as the terrible American League teams. But guys, the Yankees trying to sort it out. It's been a little bit of a roller coaster the past few months, but this is a nice week for them to build off of. We'll like to see them close it out. They got a couple of games lead now on the Orioles, and I think they are on their way to the division title. Number 4, coming off a massive series sweep of the Giants this weekend. Just had to move them up a couple of spots because they continue to play pretty solid, and the very most are winning. I remember a month and a half ago, I was talking about how they were flirting with 500 constantly. Maybe it was 2 months ago now. But now there are about 20 games above 500, which is something to be happy about. And at the same time, I don't know if Padres fans or really the Padres management are going to be too happy unless we start to see a little bit of some playoff baseball being won. So while at number 4, it's something to be excited about. I think the Padres are wanting more, and we really won't see if that's possible until playoff time. Can they make the division lead? It's possible. Are they going to get that first round bye if they get the division lead? I don't think so. Number 3, I do have those Dodgers who are holding on to that division. Not amazing things happening with the rotation. There are some, pretty much seems like some glaring weaknesses right now in this Dodgers pitching staff, as well as they just don't seem to have the power that they used to. They're not playing above 600 baseball, which is like the first time, feels like in a long time for the Dodgers, even though we have Ohtani on his way for 50 and 50, which would be an incredible achievement. The Dodgers just right now aren't blowing it away. I know a couple of weeks ago I said they were unanimous number 1, and since then they haven't done much to be excited about. 1-4 this week, 1-2 against the Cubs. 0-2 so far against Atlanta. They're playing their game 3 right now and another game tomorrow. If they lose this series, it's somewhat concerning because it very well could be a playoff matchup if they don't get that first round bye. It's very possible. But Dodgers at number 3, I think, makes sense. Number 2, I feel like they were one inning away from hitting that number 1 spot, the Milwaukee Brewers. And that's part of why I was holding off so long, because that game was so epic back and forth. 3-0 series sweep over Arizona would have, in my opinion, clinched number 1 because they've just been playing such lights out. But 2-1, still something amazing to be. Number 2, nothing to hold your nose at, and very well on their way to achieving that first round bye. They were a couple of games out, and it would have been nice for them to win that because they would have been maybe 1 game back from the Dodgers now for that first round bye. So it wasn't great for them to not close that out, but right now they are playing great. 2-1 against San Francisco earlier in the week. They do have somewhat of a tough schedule. They got to win against the teams that they're going to be playing against. 4 more games against Arizona coming up, going to be impactful. But that leaves me at number 1. They are back. and maybe rocketed up the boards over the past 2 weeks. It feels like it just seems like they've turned it on when it mattered most. 3-0 against Tampa, 2-1 against the Mets. They've had struggles with Aaron Nola as of late in a couple of his last starts, and they still managing to pick up some big wins with. So pretty much in that situation now, it looks like they're going to be guaranteeing that chance at that first round bye, which I think will be very big, because when they go into that next round, the other teams that they're going to face are going to have to use their two aces, and they're going to have Wheeler, they're going to have Nola, they're going to have that kind of stuff in their advantage. So it's going to be huge for the Phillies to do that. At the same time, they've been playing good, and they're the only team in the MLB above 600. So you got to give a little bit of credit for the Phillies, even though there's been times where you're like, not sure they can compete with the top teams and whatnot. It seems like realistically, if you picked out any one of these teams in the top 10, you can find stretches throughout the season where it's just like, is this team even capable of making the playoffs? And that's the same case with the Phillies. But guys, there you have it. We got one more power rankings left and coming next week, and then that's pretty much it for this season. We'll be making a transition into NFL at that point. Of course, we're going to do playoff videos. We're going to talk about the MLB playoffs as well. So if those are all things you enjoy talking about, subscribe to the channel, smash that like button. Really helps the channel grow, and that's what we're doing. I'm trying to build a community here who likes talking about sports all season long, all the different sports. Just love talking about it with you guys. Let me know what you guys think. Till the next video, peace out.